Um, we're up for our first panel. In fact, there's a lot here, and we need two sponsors to bring it to you. Bradley Thoroughbreds and Fasig-Tipton. Let's take a look at one of our panel sponsors.
Well, Fasig's family, basically. Some of the guys that work here I've known for 30 years.
Let's take a look.
Customer service. I'm not only a buyer with them, but I'm a seller.
There's a lot of different things that sometimes you need in a sale, and Fasig-Tipton is there every step of the way.
They show year after year that they're ethical and they're fair and they enjoy what they do. But when you're around people that have a combination of all those things, you can't lose.
All in line and
Okay, I don't have a video camera or a monitor in front of me, so I'm not seeing what you're seeing, but you saw that from our good folks at Fasig-Tipton. Now, I'm going to do something basically I haven't done in 8 years. Be forewarned. We want to thank the fine folks at Bradley Thoroughbreds who are about to indulge me. Bradley Thoroughbreds has over 50 years of experience in racing venues, pinhooking, public auctions, and private sales. Their co-ownerships include Day at the Spa, She's a Julie, and What's the Chances? Bradley Pinhooking Ventures have produced such horses as the Great Lady Eli, V.E. Day, and that damn horse I bet on was 30-1 in the Kentucky Derby and just missed by a nose to California Chrome, Commanding Curve. And down the stretch, here's Country Grammar, We the People, and Moonswag. At the wire, it's Bradley Thoroughbreds for the win. Now you know why I retired. Let's put that act away for another 8 years. So to the business at hand, those who are seasoned in the thoroughbred public auction arena know about selecting horses to purchase, important aspects about vetting horses prior to bidding, pinhooking young horses to resell, and confirmation do's and don'ts. And you're about to hear from an illustrious panel of advisors and agents. And we think you'll come to understand how immensely important they are in planning your thoroughbred stable. To lead our panel discussion, we'd like to welcome our moderator who knows a thing or two about the subject. She's done a lot of things in racing. She was a television presenter, television personality. She was a jockey's agent. She's owned horses. And she is the founder of Conley Bloodstock LLC, where she buys, sells, and manages racehorses and breeding stock. She has consigned at world-class auctions like Keeneland and Fasig-Tipton, and she's purchased top horses for top racing and breeding operations in both California and Kentucky. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a warm welcome for Carolyn Conley.
Thank you so much, Tom. Last time I saw you, I think we were tangoing on the stage for the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation Gala.
Yes, that dancing act is another one of my retired acts. And it's always nice when you're dancing and you're 6'1" and your partner is 2 inches taller than you are. That's another reason.
They were big shoes. So good to be here and so much fun to be up at Saratoga. There's never a bad time to be at Saratoga. It's just a treat, and I'm honored and delighted to be here. And ladies and gentlemen, we are going to hear from 3 experienced, knowledgeable, and insightful panelists that are going to join me on stage to walk us through the essentials required when you decide to get into the sport of thoroughbred racing from the auction or private sales perspective. So first up, United States military graduate, is the founder and CEO of West Point Thoroughbreds, which is one of the largest thoroughbred partnerships in the world. Please welcome Terry Finley. Hey, Terry. Next up is the namesake of TJG Sales Company and Dreammaker Racing, offering complete services in all areas of thoroughbred horse breeding, racing, sales, management, and appraisals. Join me in welcoming Tom Gallo. That'll be fine. Thanks, Tom. And finally, this Kentucky native is the U.S. agent for Goffs and the president of West Bloodstock. Ladies and gentlemen, Jacob West. Okay, we're going to get started, Jacob, by talking about selecting horses, and we'll start with you. You've all had success purchasing horses at public auction. What process do you follow to identify potential athletes, young horses for clients?
Yeah, I'd describe going out and looking for horses much like the NFL Combine or the NBA Draft or some sort of scouting agency that's going out and looking at young talent for a professional sports team. And the process I use is pretty simple. I just go to work and try to get my eyes on as many horses as I possibly can and just try to identify athletes. I don't try to pay a lot of attention to the pedigree. I just try to find a certain type that I'm looking for. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of eyes. It takes a lot of miles getting covered. But that's kind of where I start. I just don't try to get too involved in the pedigree book, and I try to, identify the athletes as best as I can.
How about you, Terry?
Well, I think that captures a lot of it. I think the one thing to follow on to Jacob's point about the team and going to sales and get your eyes on the vast majority of the horses that are on offering. I think the other thing is you just keep it simple, right? You keep it simple. We see teams that come into the business and they try to make, or their systems all of a sudden get complex. And I see the people and the teams that are at the top of the business and that buy the best horses over and over again, they keep it simple. And I think that's the key. And I know that's the part of the process that I'm constantly thinking about and imparting to the team that I work with.
But how do you keep it simple with 4,000 or 5,000 yearlings going for 2 weeks, one after another, looking at horses, buying them at the same time, running back to the ring? How can you find simplicity in that?
That's a good question. Well, I think you try not to get overwhelmed, especially at the Keeneland sale when they're selling 4,500 on a good year. The last couple of years, it's been a little bit below 4,000. Right, but you can't get flustered, and you have to keep in the groove. And I think process is important, right? You're after the first couple days, your team is, part of your team is in the ring, trying to identify the horses. The last part of the process to bid on horses, right? But the rest of your team is up in the back barns. Sorting through the horses that are going to be sold 2 or 3 days into the future. So, I think process really leads to the simple part of the team overall. So that's what I would say is process is key in simplicity.
And we'll get into that a little more. Tom, how about you?
I'm the opposite. I'm one of the more complex selectors. Also, I put a lot of importance on pedigree. So what I do is I start out with a budget, of course, because I'm not going to be able to afford the horses that Terry and Jacob can afford. I don't shoot for the better horses in the auction. In the past 20 years, I've been buying essentially horses for new people like yourselves that are just getting into the business. And I always felt that my job was risk management, right? So in order to the first way I try to manage the risk or reduce the risk is by going through the pedigrees as soon as the catalogs come out and knowing essentially in my mind what our budget is going to be. Usually we shop under 200,000, under 250 to 200,000, and I start to really go through the pedigrees. I'm looking for proven and proven. I'm very rarely buying an unproven stallion, and I'll never, not say never, but I'm very rarely buying an unproven mare, and certainly never buying the combination of an unproven stallion, unproven mare. So I'll look at the female families, because in our business, like it should be in the rest of the world, the women control the whole situation. And I don't know if you know this, but and gentlemen, if you think it's different, you're kidding yourselves. But anyway, in the horse business, you can tell a lot about the horse that you're going to select and what it's going to do and what its propensity towards distance, age, precocity, and things like that by looking and analyzing the female family. We look for racing class in the female family up close, up in the first and second dam, real high racing class, because we want to be competitive at Belmont, Aqueduct, and Saratoga, which are some of the toughest, most competitive fields you can run in the United States. So I'll look for racing class in the female family, and then a proven stallion. The stallion will give me an idea of whether that horse is going to fit my budget. Because the beauty of our industry is statistics. You can go and look at statistics. You got so many statistics, they'll actually boggle your mind. But basically, you go by, in this business or in our selection process, you're going by yearling averages, essentially. So I'm not going to go after Tappet. I'm probably not going to go after Tappet, Uncle Mo, now Into Mischief, horses like that. I'm going to be going after, the real meat and potatoes horses, the real solid horses that are grinding out not only graded stakes winners, but good solid competitors, and maybe stallions that are in a little bit of a quiet time. Not like the stock market, not all stock tends to go up. Sometimes stallions, will have a little bit of a quiet period, and it's those periods when not only their offspring aren't hitting, but their stud fee starts to go down a little bit. That's when you can grab some value in a pretty fancy stallion. So we do the pedigrees and go through the pedigrees, figure out what horses we can actually afford, and then go look at them. My client relations manager and my sales associate, he's a young kid, he's big on like stats, everything stats. And some of the things he talks about and comes up with, I don't even understand. But that's his job. And then we have a gentleman that goes with us and does the physicals. I'll also refer to a good friend of mine, Alan Porter, who's one of the top geneticists in the business. And he and I will go back and forth on a group of pedigrees that maybe I've selected to look at. So it's just a lot of homework for me before the sale, before we even get to the sales grounds.
Absolutely, and that goes for weanlings, yearlings, 2-year-olds. Jacob, do you have a preference of which group you like to buy in, and what are the ups and downs of each?
Yeah, I would say that my preference would be to buy as yearlings. Now, what comes with that is the inherent risk of, you're buying, the closer you get to the racetrack with a horse, whether it's a proven horse, a 2-year-old in training, yearling, weanling, mare and foal, the closer you get, the quote-unquote less risk you have in the sense of the ability of the horse on the track. But in my mind, buying them as yearlings, there's just more to choose from. At the 2-year-old in training sales, the horses get narrowed down because there's a time, there's a gallop out time, there's a physical part of it, there's a vetting part of it. So once the horses start checking all those boxes, normally the price goes up. At the yearling sales, you're kind of one step removed from the racetrack. So assessing talent on the racetrack is you're just inheriting more risk. So, but because there's more horses on offer as yearlings, There's just more variety to choose from, and more. I just feel more safe buying there, because then you get to control where the horses go, where they get broke, where they get put into training, where they learn their their early exercises, and then they get handed off to the trainer. But in my preference, it would definitely be yearlings.
And they wouldn't have gone through the rigors of a 2-year-old sale. Terry, you've bought some pretty high-priced horses, both as yearlings and as 2-year-olds. Which area do you prefer, and do you concern yourself at all with what they have to stand up to and go through in the 2-year-old sale?
So I think it's an ongoing process. I evaluate. I'll talk about the 2-year-old sales because you talk about the pressure. And I think all of us are thinking about that, right? The 2-year-old consigners are getting better and better each year. They truly are. They're honing their craft. And I think on one side, that's a concerning aspect of the 2-year-old sales, because they're buying, or they're trying to buy the same horses that the end users are trying to buy at the 2-year-old sales. Obviously, they have to put the pressure on those yearlings and on the short 2-year-olds in January and February to get them to the 2-year-old sales. Jacob talked about the advantages of actually seeing a 2-year-old on the racetrack, and the ones that they seem to separate from their peers. So that's a good thing, right? But you have to be careful at the 2-year-old, because overall there's a lot of sizzle. And you see horses and they'll work 9 and 4. When I started 31 years ago, I think everybody was talking about I can't wait for the first horse to work 10 flat. So I think the first one was Eddie Woods. So everybody started calling him Eddie Woods, 10 flat Eddie. Right, but now I think there must have been at the last 2-year-old sales, there had to be 75 to 80 that worked 10 flat, and there were 20 of them that worked 9 and 4, and I think there was a 9 and 3 at the March sale. So I think it's part of it is the outlook that you have and the program that you've put together, either as an individual owner or as a team or a partnership. But the 2-year-old sales, they offer a lot of value, but I think the risks are inherent in that pressure that's applied to the 2-year-olds. We do find that the yearlings are coming under a lot of stress as well. To get to the Saratogas and the first couple days of Keeneland, there are horses that are very well prepped. I talk to the old timers in the game, and they talk about in the 70s and 80s, and the yearlings would be brought out of the field, say a day or two before the sale, and knocked off and either brought up here to Saratoga or to Keeneland. So, I think it gets into handicapping the consigners and the farms and the outfits that are actually bringing the horses to market, either at the yearling sales or the 2-year-old sales. But I think it's also really cool that every year we always see horses that perform on the racetrack, and they come from either a new outfit or they come from an outfit that up to date or to date they really haven't had a whole lot of success. And I think that's what keeps us all in the game, on the buying side and the selling side, right? We all heard, over the years, we've all heard good horses, they can and they do come from everywhere. And, I think that's the way it has to be, right? Because if it wasn't, the wealthiest people in our game would be in the winner's circle on the Saturday afternoons all across the country. And I love the fact that we all have a shot to catch lightning in a bottle, especially at the sales.
Tom, any weanling purchases to discuss at this point, or do you also focus on the yearlings and 2-year-olds?
No, I like, you know, it's finding the right horse. I like buying weanlings. I prefer buying weanlings and yearlings, like Jacob said, because, you know, you can find a yearling that you like and you can put into your program. In other words, you can take that horse and train it according to how you think it should be trained, or not so much that, how the horse is telling you it should be trained. Some horses need time. Some horses come up with buck shins. Some horses come up with this, come up with that. I think at the 2-year-old sales, when you have these dates that they have to work, you know, a certain time on a certain date, it's an artificial date. It's something that I think is very unnatural for a horse. And like Terry said, you know, you have to handicap the consigners as well as the horses. Also, I'm pretty old-fashioned. Like, you know, like if I see, going back to the 2-year-old sale, I'd like to see in an early 2-year-old sale, early foals, right? I'd like to see, if you're going to the March sale, I want to be looking at January and February foals because they've had more time to mature, physically mature, and if their pedigrees say that they are precocious, that those are the horses that I would key on. I hate to see like an April, May, or June foal working, you know, an eighth or a quarter in a March sale, because to me, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that horse might not physically be ready for that. I think that's why the April sale, the OBS sale, has become so popular, and the May sale, Fasig-Tipton in Maryland, have become so popular because a lot of these horses have had time to mature. And let's face it, the majority of horses aren't foaled in January and February. A lot of them are foaled later. I just like to see horses that are ready to do what they're supposed to do. Otherwise, you know, you're going to have things happen that you may not be able to correct later on. Another reason I like the yearling sales is the horses are just so much more relaxed. You know, when you go to a 2-year-old sale, these horses have already, by the time you get to the sale, the horses have already probably worked 2 or 3 times. So they're really on the muscle. They're really like, you know, they're really like ready to go. As you guys must realize, I mean, a racehorse is the fitness level of an NFL athlete, a Major League Baseball player, well, more football than baseball, the baseball guy. But you know, or basketball, right? I mean, they're at that fitness level, right? So when you have 2-year-olds at the sale, they're still at that fitness level, and sometimes, you know, being on the muscle, you don't really get a chance to see them really calm down and walk. When you go to the yearling sales and and a horse has been there for a couple of days and they've been showing for a couple of days and they've been out of the stall and they've been stretching and they're relaxed and they're not stiff anymore from being in a stall or being prepped, you can really see how they flow. You can look into their eyes. You can see how they act. And you can take time with the horse, you know, and really get to know them. And, like I'm sure Jacob and Terry both do, you know, you can come back and see that horse at different times of the day and see them still basically at rest, not having trained, and see how they act and react. And then towards the sale, see if they still have that same brightness in their eyes, skip in their step that they did the first day that you looked at them. And that usually indicates that a horse, you're looking at a horse that has some class, you know, it can really handle itself physically, and the sale has not taken anything out of them. And those are some of the horses that you key on, you know.
Terry, you mentioned handicapping the consigners, the breeders. When you see Stone Street Bred and Raised, which is a new kind of branding format that we're seeing now, you get an idea of the background of that horse, the land it was raised on. Are you keying in on those sort of things?
I would say yes. You know, I think the reason is because I was sitting in my box yesterday and I finished 1-2 in that great race on a Saturday. Well, I'm saying 2 Stone Street.
Oh, right.
A Clairiere and a Malathaat.
Yes.
So, yes, I think it's very good. Because a lot of times, you know, you'll see the bigger operation. You'll see Spendthrift and a Stone Street, right? They'll parcel out their yearling class, right? So there's not a single operation that will sell. And I think it's a positive, you know, especially as they build a reputation and they build a track record.
I think it's very good because a lot of times you'll ask a consignor, and you'll probe about where they raise the horse. And so there'll be times a horse will raise or actually be raised in another part of the country, and then will be shipped in for the sale. So I think that will be a continuing a trend, especially for the top breeders, to designate on the top of the catalog page that they bred the horse and they raised the horse. And it's all, obviously there are a lot of operations that sell horses for a lot of money at the yearling sales. I just love the fact that we have a finish line in our business, right? Because it's really about them performing on the surface behind everybody, i.e. on the racetrack. And I think that's, all the data that Tom talked about, all the research, all the hands that are part of every single horse that we see. It's all about the racetrack. And I think that's what binds us all. And I think that's a big part of the passion that we all share of our business is that it doesn't matter their pedigree, where they came from, where they were bred. If a horse can perform on that grass or on that dirt behind us, it's all good.
Mm-hmm. And part of it's getting them there. You have to concern yourself with nutrition, which has been a big part of what I've been involved in. And you may associate different farms with a better feeding program or such things, where they have a little more bone or a little more opportunity to make the races.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's, early, if you're likening it to humans, early childhood education is kind of the basis of what you're built on. So that'd be the same way with horses. Where they come from and what the education they get early on is very vital to them.
But the small outfits can still get it done, so that's the fun of it. And we've seen some horses that weren't expensive or maybe bred to the hot stallions have incredible success. I think we witnessed that in the Kentucky Derby this year. Terry, what are some examples of horses you've bought maybe that weren't expensive but went on to really perform?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, thinking about the Kentucky Derby, I think that's the other part of our business is, I was amazed. I just couldn't believe it. And I would think a lot of other people sitting in the audience, I'd like to think there aren't too many things I haven't seen. I started in the business when I was 12. And, I've seen a lot of things, over the years you do. And I think that binds us all to see a horse. I don't know, what was he, 60 to
80 to 1.
80 to 1, and that storyline, it just
unbelievable.
It just unbelievable. It rocks you back on your heels. The fact that group, that the ownership group and the trainer. I thought one of the coolest part was the groom that was on the racetrack, and he got a chance to hug his father as the Derby winner was coming. His Derby winner was coming back to the winner's circle. But over the years, yes, Macho again is one that we, that I think about. We bought him for $150,000 as a 2-year-old. JJ Krupe, who actually passed about 3 years ago, was a colorful character, and he sold a lot of good horses over the years. And I relied on his, opinion and his trust and the confidence that he had in his horses. And I do remember right after I bought the horse, John Kimmel walked up to me. He said, "Did that little gray horse did he sell?" He said, "Yeah, I just bought him." He said, "Oh my God, I took a phone call and walked out of the back ring at Ocala." But actually, there's a tie-in because Macho again finished second to Rachel Alexander. Tom Durkin made that call. It was a call that still gives us chills. And the funny thing is, I live across the street, so I can hear the crowd. If I go back, we run, poorly in the third race. I'll go home and I'll watch the second half of the card. on my porch, and so I can hear the crowd, I can hear the announcer. So I would come in, I'd come in, early, and I'd get licensed or whatever I do. I'd get tickets for partners, and every day at 11:30 for about 5 years, the thing they did to check the sound system was to play the last 30 seconds of the Woodward in 2009 with Tom Durkin. That great call. Rachel Alexander raises the roof at Saratoga. So I actually ask him that story because I think it's a fascinating story. Tom Durkin was up in the booth, but the horse that finished second was our little guy Macho Again. So he made about $1.9 million, and he showed up, and he kept us relevant. I think that's the one thing I think about. If you're in the game and you're buying horses, you have to try to stay relevant, and you have to have those horses that are upper level, right? Because you're going to go through ups and downs. And I always appreciate those horses, that kind of keep us in the game, and I'm so appreciative to every horse that carries our silks, and every horse that carries anybody's silks out, but especially the ones that kind of keep us in there. So I'll give you that example of a Macho Again back in 2008, 2009.
Still macho after Rachel beat him, but that's all right.
Yes, he was. Actually, the funny thing is, you talked to Robbie Alvarado, and he talked to Calvin Burrell, and we were getting to her. I'm not sure we would ever get past her. But Calvin Burrell said to Robbie as they galloped out right past him, he said, "You're never going to get by me, Robbie." So it was just a beautiful thing. And you talk about leaving it on the field. Take a look at the past performances of every single horse. You're talking about a 3-year-old filly running against older Grade 1 winners. You look at the past performances after the Woodward in 2009, and they were all, every single one of them did not get to the level that they were before. So every one of them left it on the racetrack there, and overall we were just proud to be part of it.
That's so much fun, and it brings to point an intangible with racehorses. And we're going to talk a little bit about conformation here in a moment, and things we can live with, things we can't. But that intangible, that heart, that willingness to put it all out there, that's something that we can't measure, but it's something we feel. And we're in an era now where we have digital consignments, we have in-person consignments. Jacob, you're out there in the trenches selling horses, buying horses. Is there a point at which a horse almost speaks to you, where you almost feel something when you look at a horse?
I think absolutely. I always use an analogy that one of my mentors said to me, like, you can know nothing about horses, you can know nothing about sports, but if LeBron James walks into this room right now, you have a pretty good idea, like, the guy could do something professionally in a sport. And I liken that to horses. Once you kind of get an idea of what you're looking for, when a horse walks out in front of you that has class, it just like, it snaps. You just get it. It's a look in their eye. A look of eagles is kind of a saying that the old timers use. They stare off into the distance, and you don't even know what they're looking at, but they're just looking off into the distance, gazing off into the distance. There's a famous picture of Seattle Slew where it's just like Slew's eye, and you kind of see it in a lot of museums and stuff, like racing museums and stuff. But it's kind of like that's what you're looking for, that smartness, intelligent, kind of classness of the horse. And when you're around the good ones, they all have it. I know sometimes people talk about fillies that'll be a little feisty, kind of have a little bit of a pizzazz about them. Colts, normally are just classy horses. When you go to Central Kentucky and you see all the stallions, you go to the stallion farms. I'll guarantee you 99 out of 100 times when they walk a stallion out in front of you and stand him up, he'll stand up like a statue. They look like Adonises. They look big, strong, muscular. That class, that presence is something that you definitely have to look for.
And feel for, almost, I would say. Gary, let's move into conformation at this point. What physical flaws would you avoid, and what can you live with?
Well, like Jacob was saying, I think your first impression is really important. When you pull a horse out of a stall and he comes out and the way he positions himself, the way he looks, I think that's your first indication that, you know, like the wow factor. You know, wow, I like this horse. I hope this horse is correct. I hope he's got a good walk. I hope he vets out, blah, 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 because so far I really like him. And then, you know, you walk the horse, and the good ones have like a rhythm when they walk. It's like it's a beautiful rhythm. It's like a symphony of movement, right? When they walk, when they walk, they're totally coordinated. They're reaching out, they're pushing under, and everything seems to click like a synchronized machine. And when you see them from the back, when you see them from the front, also you want them to really put their head down and be a little bit serious about what they're doing. You may not get that the first day they're there, the first morning they're there if you come early, because they're in a new place. They've just been put into this strange stall in a strange place. But later on, you know, if they sit, once they get over that and they walk and they just put their head down and just look like they're going to work, like work horses, I think that's something that catches my attention. And just that they have nice fluid motion. That they put their feet down in a solid way. They're not dragging, they're not scuffing, they're just really up and down. And I think with fillies, you know, it's the same thing. Colts, fillies, you know, you want to see a little bit of class. You want to see if things are going on, if you're at a large consignment and there's a lot of activity going on, a lot of horses out, a lot of horses being shown, that this particular horse just walks out like he or she are the only ones there. You know, I think that's a good indication. You won't get that all the time, and I might not be able to buy that horse, but Jacob might, right? But I'm looking for that horse in my budget level. So I think it's presence, it's fluidity of motion, and then I think once you get that impression and watch them walk and everything, I see so many people that go and we have people come around with us sometimes, and they just start picking horses apart. Like they start looking for the negatives. Like I'm totally different. I'm looking at the positives and then seeing if the horse has a little bit of a negative, whether it's an offset knee or it toes in a little bit, whether we can live with that, whether we can all live with that. But I'm starting with a real positive attitude, which all of you need to do and should be doing, because you're here looking to own racehorses, and you better be positive and optimistic. But I think starting with a real positives, and then hoping that the horse makes the grade as you go through, including, I'm not going to jump ahead, but including the x-ray things and things like that. But
Yep.
I think it's your first impression, right?
Right, and let's go to the x-rays, Terry. The vet is part of your team. You kind of briefly outlined a few members of your team. The vet, obviously, a big part of that. But now we have the repository. It wasn't something they had when I was toting scopes and x-rays around for vets back in the 90s. You know, they scoped and x-rayed everything. But now they put those in, the video endoscopy in the repository and the x-rays. But yet still people will vet them on their own. Where do you stand on that, and how do you use the repository?
Yeah, so our vet is a very important team member on our team. And although I do know there are consigners that say the vets are too hard on and they fail horses, I find most vets that are servicing teams of buyers, right? What they do is they manage the risk. And they give you a gauge of the risk that they think you're going to incur. So you go to a 2-year-old sale and a person says he's never taken a bad step, and the vet and or I will say he's only breezed 1/8 of a mile 3 times, and we're trying to get horses that are going to go 1 mile and 1/8 and are going to have to breeze 60, 70, 80 times over the course of their 2 or 3 year career. So, the vet's very, very important. you talk about the repository, which is a place at a sale where the consigners actually will their vets will put in, I think it's 38 views of the horse. So what predicated that, or actually what precipitated the repository, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, you know, it was a very inefficient process. So if there were any number of buyers that were zoned in on a group of horses at the top of the sale, what were perceived to be the top horses, right? There'd be 10 different vets, and they'd be taking X-rays and they'd be doing scopes on horses. So obviously, if a horse is being X-rayed, he's in the stall and he's not able to be shown to other buyers. So I think the vast majority of us think it was a positive thing to develop a repository. I'll give you one caveat. You know, we've been doing it for, I don't know, about 20 years. When you think about it, you buy a horse, whether you buy a horse for $50,000 or you buy a horse for $2 million, right? You're relying on the X-rays of the seller in the repository. And I can't, I just can't fathom how people can pay a lot of money and not take their own X-rays after the sale, all right? Because in the conditions of sale in the catalog, they give you, as the buyer, the protection of if there's a material difference in the X-rays that you take afterwards, compared to the X-rays in the repository, that you're able to return that horse. So, over the last, say, 5 years, there have been, I'd say 7 or 8 times where we've actually given a horse back. And I'd like to think the vast majority of those were just angles on a joint, which does happen. Taking X-rays overall is not an exact science. So, I just offer that. I'd say the one tip I'd give you is if you put a team together, is to take X-rays after the sale.
And I'll say, as a consignor, the last thing I want to do is have someone return a horse. So Jacob, you have 25 yearlings in Keeneland, September. You're going to be very busy. You must go after the best vet to get the most accurate X-rays to avoid something like that, right?
So I'll summarize my relationships with vets very simple. I hate vets.
We all do.
I have a very love-hate relationship with vets. They are vital to our game. They are necessary people. But they are.
It's like a necessary evil, right?
They are. Yeah. They are dream crushers in our business.
Horse killers.
They at the end of the day. Vets in our business have helped us all avoid landmines. But we've also, their opinion, I think Terry touched on it best, their opinion should be used as a guide for risk. I would tell any new owner getting into the business or any new owner experiencing things, when it comes to vetting, I summarize it very simply. Bone is fixable. Soft tissue takes time. So if a vet comes back to you and says there's a chip here, there's a chip there, et cetera, I don't necessarily just mark that horse off because some people might, because they don't want to go in and do surgeries and things like that. I don't see that as a negative. Now, when they come back in sesamoiditis and things that are involved with tendons and ligaments and things like that, tears, then I would tell you need to take that a lot more seriously because that'll slow a horse down faster than a little chip here or chip there that's not in the joint or et cetera, et cetera. Airway is another thing. We don't mess with bad throats. Nothing will stop a fast horse quicker than a bad throat. So we don't mess with that. You touched on selling horses. A partner and I started a new consignment, Highgate Sales. We just sold 4 horses at the last July sale at Fasig-Tipton, and we had one horse in particular that when the vet turned in the repository films and the summary of the films, it was clean. And then I actually had a client who was interested in buying the horse, and we sent our vet in to go vet it, and he came back with a sheet that had 4 comments on the sheet. So they weren't necessarily negative, and I don't know how Terry and Tom work with their vets, but how I work with my vet is I always tell them, just tell me if you know for a fact that this is going to slow the horse down. It's green light, red light. That's it. Don't tell me, it's got this and this might work and the percentages of this and the stifle and the hock. Don't tell me that. Green light, red light. That's all I need to know, because with all the horses that we have on the track, and anybody who is an experienced owner knows that whatever they have as a baby isn't normally what slows them down out here. There's another issue that comes along. So don't, and they change so quick, especially weanlings, yearlings, 2-year-olds. And it's interesting buying for the people that I buy for. Mike Rapoli is, a lot of you guys know Mike in here. He's an absolute psychopath and crazy, and he's a great man. But if we like a horse, we will literally send in 8 vets to go vet a horse, and we will find a vet who will eventually pass it. And then he will say, all right, let's go ahead and buy it. That's the way he is. We have the same view of vets. Green light, red light. Just tell us if it's going to pass, if it's not. If you know for a fact it's going to stop this horse, then tell us that, and we won't buy it. But if you don't know for a 100% fact that it's not going to stop this horse, then we're going to go after it and give it a shot. So.
That's good advice. I like that. And you mentioned the sheet that's at the consignment. And if you go look at yearlings or 2-year-olds, you can ask the consignor, can I see the book? And they'll bring out the book, and it'll show you the x-ray results as documented by the veterinarian who performed the x-rays. And then it'll show you the throat evaluation, because they did an endoscope, and typically there's a video version of that endoscope of the throat in the repository. How often do you rely on those sheets? Or do you, if it's a cheaper horse, do you maybe just go by what's in the book?
I think the sheets are a preview. So when the repository first started back, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, it was like a shock. There was like about 3 or 4 years that all of a sudden it came to the attention that oh my God, these horses aren't perfect. And people would see these sheets and they'd see things on them. They had no idea what these things were. But if they saw something on the sheet, it was like, I don't want that horse. I got to have 100% horse. I have to have 100% clean horse. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no such thing as a 100% clean horse, all right? And as time wore on, and we have adopted different types of vets. So back then, you had all kinds of vets going to the sales and reviewing X-rays, taking X-rays. Now what we have is we have a group of seasoned sales vets. All they do is repository. They do sales X-rays. They do sales endoscopic exams. And now by now we're dealing with a group of vets, ladies and gentlemen, that have seen these little issues 1,000 times, right? And now they know they can translate for us. Tom, don't worry about this. This is nothing. This is nothing. This is nothing. This is a P1 chip. You pop that out. Don't worry about that. They know that I want to race. I want to race. So a lot of these things aren't going to affect the horse. Like Jacob said, when you get into the soft tissue issues, that may be where you may have issues where the horse might need 30 or 60 days before you start breaking them, or breaking them and then giving them 30, 60 days. So you have to know what's the plan for the horse before you buy the horse. Why am I buying this horse? Do I have a disease that's going to kill me in 6 months? Do I have to see this horse race in 6 months? Then, well, don't get into horse racing, but anyway.
No,
but what I'm
keep
saying
you alive.
is, you have to give the horses, you have to give yourself a certain amount of time. So what we've come down to now, like was alluded to earlier, was like when I have horses in a sale, and I just went over this with one of my sales vets. Doc, how many people am I going to lose? Like, this horse has this, and this. Am I going to lose 10% of the people, 20%? And we're talking not people, but the sales vets representing the people. Am I going to lose 10%, 20%, 30%, 50%? And you get those percentages. You know how much it's going to cost to put this horse into the sale, and then you have to gauge, is it worth it? Do I want to just let this horse go because I'm going to lose 50% of the people, or do I want to keep the horse, give it some time, and race it or try it at a later sale? Another thing is it's the vast majority now of the buyers that are buying horses are not retail buyers, but what I call wholesale buyers, the pinhookers, okay? The people that want to resell horses. Now, they don't want to see anything on that sheet. They really are looking for a squeaky clean horse. Why? Because in 6 months, 8 months, a year, they're going to have to take that horse and resell it. And they don't want to have something that they have to deal with later on and try and explain it to their customer like I'm trying to explain it to them to get them to buy it from me. You follow? When you have horses that have issues from a sales standpoint, you may just have to sell that horse a little harder. You may just have to increase the confidence, try and increase the confidence of the buyer that this, as far as you're concerned, from your experience, from the experience of your veterinarian and his veterinarian, that this little thing is really not going to make a big difference in the long-term performance of the horse. And the thing that I go by more than x-rays is really scope. We mentioned endoscopic exams, and like Jacob said, if a horse can't breathe, they can't run. They'll work 3 furlongs and start to cough, start to gasp for air. They may go a half a mile and start to gasp for air. So the biggest thing for me is like a good scope. Like my vets know, I need to have a Lincoln tunnel throat, a good functioning Lincoln tunnel throat, and that's what I look for. And then also the feet. The feet are a big thing. You know, you have to have good, solid foot. No foot, I don't know if you guys have heard this expression, no foot, no horse. You know, when a horse comes out and they've got a good, solid foot, and you don't see any rings, and you don't see any cracks, and you don't see any dishes and things like that, that's one of the things that we really focus on looking at horses. But the repository can be your best friend, or it can be your worst enemy.
Terry, let's talk about sire power right now, and I can't wait until we get to see Flightline in the stud book.
I can't either.
But we just came out of the July sale. Freshman sires, young, unproven sires, that was the majority of that first book. Describe that risk in terms of buying horses that are by those young sires and how it compares to buying from the more established sire lines.
So I think the new sires are tricky. You know, we're all looking for the new flavor of the day, and there are only so many gun runners, right? Who probably in the history of our game has been more, I'd say, prominent and successful early than you know, any other sire. So. And you also have to look at where they come from. You know, there are some operations that they'll have a new sire, and they'll breed a new sire to 250 mares, and there's others that will be at 160. And I say, by and large, that we as buyers oftentimes don't take that into account. Obviously, if you're going to be bred to 250 really good mares, or a good book of mares overall, right? You're going to have a better shot to be prominent in the summer of their first crop of 2-year-olds, and I get sucked into it too. You know, you can fill in the blank, and you'll see horses that are getting ready to run in the Sanford and the Hopeful, and you're like, wow, that's a stallion that's really got a big shot. But there are plenty of others that they've crafted a book of mares, and they're not supposed to really start to take a hold and to get into their groove until the end of their 2-year-old year or the first part of their 3-year-old year. So the push-pull is that I'd say by and large, we all want to get to the classics, the Derby and the Oaks. yet we have I'd say a focus in Saratoga on our 2-year-olds and trying to get to the Breeders' Cup as a 2-year-old. So it's a tough thing, and going back to the data aspect, right? It's all about the individual, right? Because the data only takes you so far, and you can have a paralysis by analysis, especially in our game, right? But you have to focus on the individual, right? You have to actually buy that individual and get them into the right hands. And all those things are outside of the data that we see on a regular basis about the new sires and the younger stallions in our business. I just always say to people, right, there's always going to be a new flavor of the day. And so you just have to be careful with the new horses that are promoted really well. I'll also say that overall we're in a game of promotion, right? Dale Roman says we're in the circus. All of us have to keep dancing on a regular basis, right? Because we run and we have good prospects, and you're in a partnership, and you have to syndicate those prospects. Or you're an agent and you have to find individual owners to buy the horses that you get. But there are a lot of the stud farms and the stallion operations have gotten very, very good at promotion, as they should. That's their job, is to promote the stallions that are either syndicated or that they own. So there are a lot of I'd say influences that are coming at us as either agents or end users to try to grab our attention. But all the murkiness and all the cloudiness, right, that is created, right, goes away if you focus on the individual.
Jacob, with that said, Terry was mentioning the flavor of the month with some of these younger stallions. Yet farms will say it's harder to promote the old classic class stallions that just aren't in the public eye as much anymore. And what I find interesting is that almost creates a real opportunity for people with the mare that maybe want to do a full share. They can call those farms up and see if there's an opportunity to do that and breed your mare to a pretty classy stallion.
Yeah, I mean, the new wave of kind of going away from what's kind of proven, like, to Tom's point of what he looks for in the sales, and kind of this new flashy dangly thing right in front of your face. It seems like it does open up the opportunity for a lot of people. Like those tried and true kind of war horse stallions that just continually get runners year after year after year, but aren't so sexy in the sales ring. It's just something that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, to a lot of people in our business, when you really do step back and take a look at it. But it is kind of a what have you done for me lately game. It is kind of a, they remember seeing that horse on the track, kind of a recency bias, so to speak. And then when they see their babies, they gravitate towards that. You kind of forget about the horse that retired 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago. But you might see his progeny on the track running. But for whatever reason, it's just that recency bias, I think, plays a lot into it.
I mean, bargains can be found in that department, I would imagine. And I want to jump into conformation now while we still have time, because this is so interesting. We actually have some images that we can look at to give us a better idea of what we're talking about. And this poor, sad sack, I mean, this is the worst poor horse I've ever seen, and I would argue he's not actually sway-backed. He probably is just old and his withers are a little pronounced. But it does lay out sort of the idea, though, of a bench knee or a splint or ring bone. It shows you where on the horse these things will show up. But I think we need to get to the next slides and talk more specifically about conformation and correctness in the particular horse as it pertains to evaluating weanlings or yearlings or 2-year-olds in training. And if we can just move on, there we go. So, Tom, a normal front end, everyone wants to see that. But what little nuances could you accept within that normal range to say, okay, this is a go?
I think that, I'd rather see knees coming in a little bit than going out. Knees going out. I mean, knees are a very important part of the animal. It's a joint that comprises a lot of bones and takes a lot of impact. So the best thing is to have a nice square knee, right? And then that perpendicular, that's what you're always doing visually, is dropping that perpendicular from the point of the shoulder right down to the hoof. But you're not always going to have that. So if you're going to have a little bit of an offset knee, I would prefer probably to have them offset a little bit to the inside as opposed to the outside, because the outside, it's just not a natural way for a horse to distribute his weight. Is it possible to go back to that first slide or no? Okay, so I mean, the first thing I look for is really the overall balance of the horse. And the only reason I'm picking this horse is because they've got some key areas marked that I use in my visually to try and describe balance. So if you look at the pole, and then you look at what they're talking as to the Sweeney, just behind the Sweeney is really the point of the shoulder. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking equidistant from the pole to just behind the Sweeney, and then from the point of the hip where the tail sort of has swayed up and is covering the point of the hip. I mean, if you can have equidistant between, in those two lines, as equidistant as you can get, that's what people, when you hear about, is a horse balanced? I mean, that's what they're talking about. You want nice length to the neck, because horses are going forward, they're extending forward, so that the length in their neck helps them extend forward, as opposed to having a short neck, which will give them a shorter stride. So I just wanted to use that because it had those markings. But then if you want to go back to the next slide, I mean, balance is a very big thing for me because it just affects the locomotion, the way the horse moves, even walking. And this is what you're looking for: normal front end and normal hind end. They say that a little straighter hock will give you a faster horse. I know that Bill Graves, God bless him, he was one of the inspectors and one of the vice presidents of Fasig-Tipton. He always, when he came to the farm, he'd always love horses that had just a little bit of a less of an angle in the hock, because he thought that was something that made a horse a little faster. It's something I just happen to remember about him. But essentially, you want to see angles. You want to see that 45-degree angle from the gaskin down to the hock, and then a perpendicular down. Same thing with the normal front end. And then you want to see in the pastern, which is the bottom, the line from the ankle to the hoof. You want to see about a 45-degree angle or less in that angle there.
Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so Jacob, base narrow, base wide, offset knees, knock knees, bow legs. I've seen that in the back a lot lately, and on some good runners too, so I'm a little puzzled. What's a deal breaker here? What isn't? What do you see?
So it's hard for me to really kind of pick apart these slides and stuff, and I mean this genuinely. For 10 years of my life, I worked at TaylorMade Sales agency, and they're the #1 sellers of horse flesh in the world. And we sold multiple graded stakes winning horses, weanlings, yearlings, horses that came off the track, breeding stock sales. And I'll bet you we sold graded stakes winners that had every single one of these conformation flaws. But the one thing that I will say is that they all moved well. They were all good movers. And I think that's the biggest thing that, as a new kind of owner, a new person in the business, Wayne Lucas coined a famous term, look for the cat. Like he used to always say, like when a panther walks out of its cage, how does that move? That's what you're looking for with a horse, look for the cat. And I think that's what I go off of. Now, there's two schools of thought there, that go along with conformation. Some people could care less about how they move, and other people, that's all they want to see. But I've seen plenty of good horses that have a lot of these conformation flaws.
It's true. It's St. Trinian's always comes to mind for me that ran with Zenyatta a lot. She paddled so hard on one side, it looked like she was going to trip another horse. And I'm sure she won a grade 2, and she nearly caught Zenyatta. She was something else. But then you do run the risk of it being more difficult to keep that horse sound and to keep that horse progressing forward. Terry, you're managing huge partnership, and you're looking after your clients' investments. So you have to factor it in on some level.
You know, overall, certainly. I think I like this. I like to tell myself and the team we like to have physics on our side. You know, that's how I look at it, because it is physics. But the beautiful thing about it is there are horses that you'll see, and they'll 2-minute or they'll gallop in the morning, and you'll be like, ooh. Then they'll break off from the pole and they'll get into their breeze, and everything just comes together. It's a thing of beauty when you think about that. And Flightline, I'll bring him up. Obviously, you know, very proud of him and excited about him. But we have a stride analysis, a company that we've employed, and when we go to the 2-year-old sales, they do analysis on the way that moves. And you know, so I knew that they probably knew that the horse was Flightline, but at a gallop, he's probably, you know, I'll be aggressive. He's a 6.5 out of 10. You know, the stride, the data would indicate that he wouldn't really be that nice of a horse on the racetrack, right? But then when he gets going, everything kind of locks into place, and everything goes in the right direction, and all of a sudden the physics works, and he turns out he's a 9.5 or a 10. So, you know, that's the other thing that keeps everybody in, right? It's not just about conformation at the walk or the jog or the gallop. It's actually, you know, how they work and the physics of their body at a, you know, like a high speed and at a, you know, above a 2-minute lick, i.e. 35 miles an hour when they're on the racetrack. And, right. You know, I think that's the beautiful thing about it, because every once in a while you'll see those horses that they just click.
Horses don't know.
Lie.
Horses don't know what they look like, and they don't know who their mothers are, and they don't know who their fathers are. Either they want to run or they don't. Either they want to run and win, or they just want to run around the track with a bunch of horses because they like running around with a bunch of horses.
And they change.
So your job is to find the one that wants to get there first.
Well said. Let's go to that next slide. It has thank you, and you can see ideals. And you'll often hear agents saying, well, this horse has good angles. And this is what they're talking about. And I would even argue that maybe it's a little straight behind from the stifle to the hock, this particular one. I don't know if I'm seeing things, but as you say, it's physics. It's how it all comes together in the end. One thing we haven't touched on, and I want to quickly, is inbreeding. Jacob, what are your opinions on inbreeding, and how far back do you want to see it? When is there too much inbreeding? What do you think?
Yeah, inbreeding is an interesting topic in our industry, kind of right now and here recently. But it's hard for me to wrap my mind around inbreeding because essentially our business got started with 3 stallions. So there was some point in time there was some pretty close inbreeding going on, dating all the way back to the first start of the thoroughbred. But it's I don't really know, and I can't really discuss that in the sense of I'm not really quite sure what, you know, I don't know what the data. I know there's been some studies here recently that have talked about like close inbreeding and soundness and how it affects horses.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. Again, I obviously I think anything that's too close is detrimental, obviously. But again, that's one of those let's take a wait and see approach, really. You know, like keep keep doing what we're doing and try to see if, we can always get better at certain things, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm not smart enough to really.
Well, and I sit and
dissect
ask
that.
myself that question too when I look at these pedigrees. Terry, what do you think?
I think that the pedigrees of the horses that show up in the blood horse, in the results of the stakes across the country on a Sunday morning, is the inbreeding that works, right? The good thing, and the experts, because there are some experts, there are some people that seem to have a good sense of it. They're tweaking and they're advising the really successful operations and the breeders across the country. So I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of respects because people that are serious and they're spending money on good broodmare bands and on stallion chairs and on stallions are in sync. So I think we're going to continue to see inbreeding, but I agree with Jacob. We're really on the front lines, and the guys that are behind us are the people who are behind us are tweaking the inbreeding. And I will say, I had a flashback to trigonometry in the 9th grade. That is an isosceles triangle.
The education comes in handy. All right.
You want my opinion on inbreeding?
If we can keep it to 30 seconds or less,
Okay,
I just got the...
I think there's too much inbreeding, and I think it's been a long time since somebody's ventured out of the Mr. Prospector Northern Dancer line and imported, like they did back in the 60s and the 70s, outcross blood from Europe, and I think we're seeing it in the soundness of the horses, the distances that they're racing, and bringing up mares and foals. We've got a lot more, we're dealing with a lot more different weird, like viruses and things like that, and I think that's due to a lot of inbreeding. So I think that it's time for some of these stallion farms in Kentucky to go overseas and introduce some new blood, because I think it's needed. It's needed. I mean, when I look for broodmares now, I try and find total outcrosses, and it's very hard to find a total outcross. So that's just my opinion. I just want to say one other thing. If you guys are going to venture into this and buy yearlings or buy offspring, make sure that you get with somebody like a blood psych agent who's connected to a trainer, or get with your trainer, because essentially you're going to be giving this horse through your bloodstock agent or eventually to the trainer. So you want the trainer to be on your team. You want the trainer to really be looking forward to your purchase and him getting that horse into your barn. I think that's a big item, a big factor that we didn't touch on, but I think it's probably one of the most important factors.
I want to check with Gary quickly.